starting with the 915E and our 900 series commercial machines, there are some few key differences in our 900 series commercial mowers, but they all have a lot of commonalities that everybody should be aware of. They all have 7-gauge steel stamped decks that we already discussed. They all have 11.5 gallon fuel capacity on board, and that's in a single tank. That's not in split tanks, so you don't have to mess with the diverter valve or anything like that. 11.5 gallons on everything from the 900E to the 994R, with the exception of the 997R diesel. It actually carries 12 gallons of fuel on board. They all come with a 3-year bumper-to-bumper warranty, 1,200 hours on the E series, 1,200 hours on the M series, 1,500 hours on the R series. They all have the optional Michelin wheel. They all have the option of comfort glide on the seats. The M series and the R series, you can get the fully adjustable suspension seat. There are a few differences in the decks from the E's to the M's. Your E series features the 7-iron 2 deck. The M series features a 7-iron Pro Deck. Those key differences being that the 7-iron 2 deck does not have the rear anti-scalp wheels on the back. It also does not have the welded step plate on the left front corner to step up onto the deck. It just has a piece of grip tape. It also does not come with the cast iron spindle housings with the pressure relief valve built in. Those spindle housings are only available on the M series and the R series mowers. 915 only is available in the Kohler engine, carbureted engine, 25 horsepower. As we move up in the M and R series, we have an option for a Kawasaki carbureted engine or a diesel engine in the 994R. There are 3 deck options available on our 900 series as of 2021. A standard side discharge deck, a Mulch on demand deck, and a Fastback Pro rear discharge deck. And we will talk about some of the pros and cons of each one of those decks so that you can select the right deck for your customer. Some of the pros of a standard side discharge deck are going to be excellent aftercut appearance. They do a really nice job of cutting and dispersing material out the side and leaving a really good fit finish on your yard. Number 2 is that they are easily compatible with MCS systems. You can easily attach a bagging system or a dump from seat MCS. And the third pro of a side discharge deck is that they're the cheapest option we have. They're the most affordable option. Some of the cons of a standard side discharge deck are that you can only trim on one side, you can only discharge on one side, and that they're the widest and they can take up the most room. Moving on to the Mulch on demand deck, there are some pros and cons of that deck. Pros of a Mulch on demand deck is that you have full mulching capability. They're cleaner, they keep debris out of flower beds and out of roadways and things like that, and they're also MCS compatible. Some of the cons of a Mulch on demand deck is that they are more expensive than a standard side discharge deck because they have more moving parts and they're the baffling and all of that underneath the deck. Another con of the Mulch on demand deck is that they do require more horsepower. When you're in full mulching mode, they require the most power out of all 3 of our deck options. So those are things to consider when looking at a Mulch on demand deck. I don't have a Fastback Pro Deck here in front of us today, but there are some benefits of a Fastback Pro Deck that we should discuss. One being that you can trim on both sides of the deck. So you have a little bit more variability and maneuverability with that machine as you're trimming around different obstacles. Number 2, being that it creates less noise. There's not as much material flowing through the deck. It's all going straight out the back instead of catching all of the blades, chopping and dispersing that material out the side. It's dispersing the grass clippings out of a much wider opening on the rear of the deck versus a smaller opening out of the side of the deck. Number 3 being that it uses the least amount of power. The Fastback Pro Deck is the least power hungry deck that we have, so that makes those machines probably the most fuel efficient in the Z900 lineup. Some of the cons of a Fastback Pro Deck are the aftercut appearance. They probably have the poorest aftercut appearance of the 3 decks in our lineup simply because they're not processing that material as it's mowed. It's not passing through all 3 blades and then being discharged out the side. It's strictly cutting and throwing it out the back. So your aftercut appearance is probably going to be impacted. They are not MCS compatible. You cannot put a bagger on a rear discharge machine. And if you mow infrequently or let your grass get too tall, you have the possibility of windrowing clumping occurring behind a Fastback Pro Deck. So it's something to consider when looking at those 3 decks on our 900 series mowers.